Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into a bunch of articles and blog posts from Cheap ABA.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that site.
Yeah, and it's all about how autism and social media kind of like collide.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're going to look at how social media affects autistic people, throughout their lives,
Okay.
from the good stuff to the bad stuff, and even the stuff that's just like, ugh.
Makes sense.
We'll also talk about the unique challenges that autistic women face online.
That's a good point. I feel like that doesn't get talked about enough.
Exactly.
So what's interesting is that these cheap ABA articles, they don't shy away from the complexities, you know.
Yeah.
They show how social media can be like a double-edged sword.
Oh, totally. I mean, it can be amazing for self-expression and finding your people,
Right.
but it can also be a source of like serious anxiety or even worse.
Yeah.
Like one article talks about how autistic people, especially those who really thrive online, can find these amazing communities and connect with people who just like get it.
Yeah.
And that can be such a lifeline, especially for people who felt isolated or misunderstood in their offline lives.
Totally. It's like finding your tribe, right?
Yes.
A place where you can be yourself without feeling like you have to mask or hide your autistic traits.
Exactly.
And actually, cheap ABA even mentions specific online groups.
Really?
Yeah, where autistic people share their experiences, offer support, and celebrate neurodiversity.
That's awesome.
It's really inspiring.
It is. It's like social media is leveling the playing field in a way, giving people who might not have access to those kinds of communities in their everyday lives a chance to, connect and feel like they belong.
Exactly. It's about finding that sense of belonging.
Yes.
And it's not just about social connection either.
Oh, right.
These articles also talk about how social media can be a really valuable resource for information on things like autism and mental health.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You have access to tons of knowledge right there at your fingertips.
That's true.
Like expert articles and research studies, personal blogs, online forums.
Wow, that's a great point. It's like a personalized library, but it's curated to like your specific interests and needs.
Exactly.
I can see how that could be really empowering.
Especially for autistic people who are often, always seeking out knowledge and trying to understand things better.
Totally.
It's about taking control of your learning and seeking out information that actually resonates with you.
I like that.
But, and this is where things get a little tricky,
Ah,
we have to acknowledge that there are downsides too.
right.
It's not all sunshine and roses.
For sure.
Social media can be a mixed bag.
Yeah, cheap ABA definitely doesn't sugarcoat things.
No, they don't.
They talk about how that constant comparison, and the curated perfection that you see everywhere on social media, it can actually make anxiety and depression worse.
Oh, absolutely.
And I imagine that's especially hard for autistic people who might already be dealing with those issues.
It's like this pressure cooker of constantly comparing yourself to these idealized versions of people.
Right.
And often, those versions aren't even real.
Yeah, it's all filters and carefully chosen angles.
Exactly. So you're scrolling through your feed and you see all these images of happy families, successful careers, perfect lives.
Yeah, I hate that.
And it's so easy to get caught in this cycle of feeling inadequate or like you're not good enough.
Especially if you're already feeling kind of vulnerable.
Exactly.
And I think one of the cheap ABA articles even gives a specific example of this, right?
Yeah. They talk about this young autistic woman who was always comparing her social life to what she saw on Instagram.
Oh, no.
All these seemingly effortless friendships.
Hmm.
And it made her feel so lonely and isolated,
Wow.
even though she had a really good group of friends in real life.
It's crazy how social media can just warp your perspective like that.
It really can.
Yeah, and then there's the whole issue of cyberbullying and online harassment,
Yeah, that's a big one.
which cheap ABA definitely doesn't shy away from.
It's a serious problem.
And it's like autistic people, especially those who might be more trusting or have a harder time reading social cues, they can be super vulnerable online.
Absolutely. They might not always pick up on the subtle signs of, malicious intent.
Right, exactly.
And the impact of cyberbullying can be devastating.
For sure. It can mess with your self-esteem, your mental health, your whole well-being.
It's a big deal.
It is. And I remember one story from the blog about this autistic teenager
Oh, yeah.
who was targeted by these bullies online.
Oh, no, that's awful.
They were making fun of his special interests, spreading rumors about him.
That's terrible.
It got so bad that he just completely withdrew from social media.
I don't blame him.
He felt like he couldn't be himself online without being ridiculed.
It's heartbreaking, but it's a reality for so many people.
It is, and it's not just about the direct attacks either.
Right.
Like Cheap ABA also talks about how social media can perpetuate all these negative stereotypes about autism.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Sometimes even memes or jokes that seem harmless on the surface can actually reinforce harmful stereotypes.
Like the idea that autistic people are emotionless or robotic, or that they lack empathy.
Yeah, exactly. And while some people might brush those off as just harmless fun,
Right.
for autistic individuals, it can feel like they're constantly being told they're not normal or acceptable.
So it's a constant barrage of negativity, and it
Exactly.
can be really damaging.
What's even more concerning is that these stereotypes can actually influence how people treat autistic people in real life,
Oh, totally. It can lead to discrimination, prejudice, and just a lack of understanding.
which further isolates autistic people and makes it even harder for them to navigate the world.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is.
Ugh.
So we've got this mix of potential benefits and real risks.
Yeah,
And it seems like it can be especially challenging for people who are already struggling with things like anxiety, depression, or social isolation.
that's a great summary.
Thanks.
And it leads to a really important question.
Okay, what's that?
How does social media uniquely impact autistic women?
Ah, right, because Cheap ABA talks about how they face a whole different set of challenges.
They do, and we'll dig into those in the next segment.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. Okay, so we've talked about how social media can be like this minefield, especially for people on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, it's definitely not always an easy space to navigate.
But now the Cheap ABA blog, they really get into the specific challenges that autistic women face online.
Right, because it's not a one-size-fits-all experience.
Exactly, and I found that part super fascinating.
Me too. And what's interesting is how the blog points out that autistic women are often diagnosed way later in life,
Oh, yeah, I read about that.
or sometimes they're misdiagnosed altogether. So they
Right.
spend years feeling like they don't quite fit in.
Right, like they're out of sync with everyone else.
Exactly. And they don't even know why.
It's like carrying this invisible weight around.
That's a great way to put it.
And I can only imagine how much harder that makes social media.
Oh, absolutely. The blog even mentions this term,
What is it?
internalized misogyny.
Oh, wow. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex idea, but basically it means absorbing all these societal messages that tell you, as a woman, that you're not as valuable as men.
Oh, I see. Like those messages that tell women to be quiet and agreeable and not rock the boat.
Exactly. And autistic women often internalize those messages.
So they feel like they have to suppress their true selves.
Right. In social media, with all its pressure to conform to these, feminine ideals.
Yeah, like you have to look a certain way and act a certain way.
It can make that internalized misogyny even worse.
Yeah, it's like they're getting hit with pressure from all sides.
Exactly. They have to mask their autistic traits and try to fit into the narrow box of what it means to be a woman.
And that can't be good for your mental health,
No, it can lead to a lot of inner conflict and stress.
which can manifest as anxiety, depression, even self-harm.
The blog actually shares some anonymous stories from autistic women who talk about feeling like they're constantly having to choose between being themselves and fitting in.
Both online and offline.
Exactly. It's like this constant struggle.
It's heartbreaking.
It is, and it really highlights the need for safe spaces online where autistic women can just be themselves.
Without judgment, yes.
Exactly. And, beyond these external pressures,
Okay.
Cheap ABA also sheds light on some of the hidden struggles that autistic women often face.
Like what?
Things that people might not see or understand,
Okay.
like sensory sensitivities, for example.
Oh, right. That's a big one.
Yeah. One of the articles talks about how some autistic women find the constant flashing images and notifications and all the noise of social media super distressing.
It's just too much sensory input.
Exactly. It's like being bombarded with information.
Like having nails on a chalkboard, but for your eyes and ears.
Yeah, it can be super overwhelming.
And exhausting.
It makes it really hard to engage with social media in a way that's enjoyable.
Or even tolerable.
Right. And it can lead to this feeling of isolation.
Because social media is supposed to be all about connection, right?
Exactly. But for someone who's sensitive to all that sensory input,
It can have the opposite effect.
it can be really frustrating too, because people who don't experience those sensitivities,
They don't get it.
they don't understand why someone would want to limit their social media use.
Or avoid certain platforms altogether.
It's like having an invisible disability,
Right. You might look fine on the outside.
but on the inside, you're struggling to cope.
It's like being in an environment that feels hostile to your senses.
That's a powerful way to put it.
And this kind of ties into another important point that the Cheap ABA blog brings up,
What's that?
autistic burnout.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
They have a whole article about it.
It's a serious issue.
They describe it as this state of extreme exhaustion and overwhelm.
Right, and it can happen when you're constantly having to navigate a world that wasn't designed for autistic brains.
Like you're running a marathon every day?
Trying to mask your traits, suppress your sensory overload, and conform to all these expectations.
And eventually you just hit a wall.
It's like your battery completely drains and you can't recharge.
And this burnout, it can manifest in so many different ways.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Increased anxiety and depression,
Difficulty with communication,
social interaction.
a need for more solitude and downtime.
The blog even mentions physical symptoms.
Like what?
Headaches, digestive issues, insomnia.
All from that constant state of stress and overwhelm.
And this burnout, it can be especially common among autistic women.
Because they're facing so much pressure to mask and conform.
It all ties together.
It does, and it leads to a crucial question.
Okay, I'm listening.
What can be done about it?
Yeah, how can autistic women protect themselves from this burnout?
Especially in the context of social media.
Right, because it's such a big part of our lives now.
Cheap ABA actually offers some really good tips and strategies for managing burnout.
Oh, good.
And we'll definitely dive into those more in the next segment.
Awesome, can't wait.
But for now, I think the most important thing to remember is that self-care is key.
It's not selfish, it's essential.
Exactly. Autistic women need to prioritize their well-being.
And set boundaries.
Yes, learning to say no is crucial.
To online interactions that feel draining or overwhelming.
It's okay to step back and take a break.
Because protecting your energy is so important.
It's all about creating online environments that feel safe, supportive, and energizing.
Not draining and stressful.
Right. It's about making social media work for you.
Instead of the other way around.
And that might mean unfollowing accounts that trigger negative emotions.
Or limiting your time online.
Or finding communities that celebrate neurodiversity and make you feel like you belong.
Speaking of a community, Cheap ABA also talks about how important it is to find support networks.
Both online and offline.
Because connecting with other autistic people can be so validating.
Especially for women.
It's like finding your people.
The people who truly understand what you're going through.
The blog even mentions specific forums and groups where autistic women can connect.
It's like building a virtual support system.
A place where you can be yourself without judgment.
And those communities can be lifesavers. Especially for people who feel isolated in their offline lives.
It's amazing how social media can do that, create these connections.
Even across geographical boundaries.
So powerful.
And beyond just finding support.
Yes.
These online communities can also be incredible platforms for advocacy and education.
So, using social media to raise awareness about autism.
Exactly. Challenging stereotypes, promoting acceptance.
By sharing their experiences, autistic women can help educate others.
About the realities of living with autism.
And challenge the misconceptions and prejudices that still exist.
It can have a ripple effect.
The more we talk about autism and neurodiversity,
the more understanding and accepting society becomes.
It's about shifting the narrative.
From deficit to diversity.
Celebrating the unique strengths and perspectives that autistic people bring to the world.
That's a beautiful vision.
It is a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Regardless of their neurology.
And social media, for all its flaws, can be a powerful tool in making that vision a reality.
It has the potential to connect people and create change.
So we've talked about the challenges, the hidden struggles, the importance of community and advocacy.
It's a lot to unpack.
But what about practical strategies?
Right. What can autistic women actually do to make their social media experience better?
Less overwhelming, more positive.
That's a great question.
And one that we'll be answering in the next segment.
We'll be diving into some specific tips and resources from the Cheap ABA blog.
That can help you navigate the complexities of social media in a way that supports your well-being.
It's all about taking control and making social media work for you.
So stay tuned, folks.
We'll be right back.
Okay, so we've talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media for autistic people, especially women. But Cheap ABA doesn't just leave us hanging. They give some really practical tips for making your online experience better.
Yeah, it's one thing to understand the challenges, but it's even more helpful to have actual strategies,
Totally. So let's get into it. What are some things people can do to make their social media experience, less overwhelming and more fun?
Well, one of the simplest things, and it sounds obvious, but it's really effective, is to just be mindful of how much time and energy you're spending online.
It's so easy to get sucked in, right? Like hours can just disappear.
Exactly. You start scrolling, and the next thing you know, half the day is gone.
So true.
So the blog suggests setting specific time limits,
Oh, that's a good idea.
like actually deciding ahead of time how long you'll spend on social media each day.
It's like creating a budget, but for your attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You use a timer or even schedule specific times to check your feeds.
I like that. It takes the pressure off.
And it helps you stay in control instead of letting social media control you.
That makes a lot of sense. What other tips do they have?
Another good one is to be really picky about who you follow.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's totally okay to unfollow or mute accounts that trigger negative emotions.
Or just accounts that make you feel bad about yourself, period.
Right. You don't have to keep following people just because you feel obligated.
You have the power to curate your own online experience.
Exactly. Make it a space that feels supportive and uplifting.
Like a digital safe space.
Yeah, and this leads to another important point, setting boundaries. It's okay to say no to online interactions that feel draining or overwhelming.
Even if it's just, like, not responding to every single message.
Exactly. You don't owe anyone your time or energy, especially if it's affecting your mental health.
It's all about self-preservation.
Absolutely. Protecting your energy is so important.
Especially online where things can feel so intense sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Cheap ABA also talks about the importance of finding your community online.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned this earlier. Those groups specifically for autistic women.
Right. Connecting with other autistic people, especially women, can be really powerful.
So how do you actually find these communities? Like, where do you look?
A lot of them are on social media platforms. You can search using keywords like autism, neurodiversity, autistic women.
And a lot of these groups, they're private, right?
Some are, yeah, so you might need to request to join, but it's worth it.
It's like finding a secret club.
Kind of, but a good secret club, one that makes you feel seen and understood.
I love that.
And once you're in, don't be afraid to, participate.
Share your story.
Listen to others.
It can be so therapeutic to connect with people who get it.
And beyond just finding support, these groups can also be great for, like, advocacy and education.
So using social media to raise awareness about autism.
Exactly. Challenging stereotypes, promoting acceptance,
That's hard.
sharing your experiences, correcting misinformation, even small things like that can make a difference.
It's about using your platform to make a positive impact.
And every voice matters.
Yeah.
Every act of advocacy, no matter how small, contributes to creating a more understanding and accepting world.
That's a really powerful thought. So if you're feeling kind of overwhelmed by social media, remember you have the power to change your experience.
You can unfollow people, set boundaries, find your tribe, and use your voice to advocate for change.
It's about finding what works for you and creating an online space that feels good.
Authentic and empowering.
Exactly. And never forget, you deserve respect and acceptance both online and offline.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into autism and social media.
It's been a really fascinating conversation.
It has, and I hope our listeners learned a lot.
Me too.
Social media is a powerful tool, but it's important to use it wisely.
With intention and awareness.
And creating a more inclusive online world is something we can all work towards.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep shining your light.
You got it. See you next time.
Yeah.